Come along to the spectacular Dyspraxic event everybody is talking about. Keep fit with our free, twice-weekly fitness workout. Search Dyspraxic Cardio King Mike on social media for more information.
Dyspraxia Alliance is run by a group of dyspraxia advocates who are dedicated to providing support, advice, online safety, advocacy, and much more. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Struggling with your DIY, we can do it for you. Decorating, tiling, window care, bathrooms, kitchens, en-suites too. Commercial and industrial, RFDP and does it all. Roofing, fencing, landscaping, why not give us a call? RFDPM. Covering the southeast of England. Please call 07958 249 781 for a free, no obligation quotation.
We believe every child has potential. We know everyone learns differently. We have learned that one size never fits all. Neurodivergent children and young adults should have the world at their feet. We provide the specialist equipment to help make that possible. For more information on how we can help and the equipment we can supply, please visit www.equipforlearning.org.uk.
Holly Smale is an award-winning and multi-million best-selling author. Her work includes Geek Girl, Model Misfit, Picture Perfect and All That Glitters. She was unexpectedly spotted by a top London modelling agency at the age of 15 and spent the following 2 years falling over on catwalks, going bright red and breaking things she couldn't afford to replace. By the time Holly had graduated from Bristol University with a BA in English Literature and an MA in Shakespeare, she had given up modelling and set herself on the path to becoming a writer. Originally meant to be a trilogy, the Geek Girl series consists of 6 books. The humorous fiction follows the life of Harriet Manners, a nerdy 15-year-old girl who tries out modelling to reinvent herself. Harriet is a semi-autobiographical version of Holly portraying many neurodivergent traits and characteristics. Geek Girl was the #1 best-selling young adult fiction title in the UK in 2013. It was shortlisted for several major awards including the Roald Dahl Funny Prize and the Branford Bowes Award, nominated for the Queen of Teen Award and won the Teen and Young Adult category of the Waterstones Children's Book Prize and the 11 to 14 category of the Leeds Book Award. Along with being dyspraxic, Holly was most recently diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum at the age of 39.
Hello Holly, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. You've had a somewhat of a busy couple of weeks since you posted something really personal on social media, and I'm glad to be speaking with you. You're on high demand today, by all accounts.
Yeah, it's been overwhelming actually, but in a lovely way. I didn't expect, any real feedback or response. So yeah, it's been amazing.
So was it like? I'll go into it later in the podcast, but I won't go into it so much now. But was it not a throwaway sort of tweet or social media post? Was it more something you wanted to share in general, or was you expecting it to go sort of reach many people, or was it just something you was hoping to share to help other people?
Well, actually, so I knew that I wanted to, I made the decision, I thought about it a lot and decided I wanted to share my autism diagnosis, which happened it was officially in October last year. So I had time to think about it. And I knew that for me to kind of get my point across in a way that was, my narrative rather than potentially getting it wrong with an interview or something like that, the best way for me to do it was to write a feature, because writing is my skill. So I wrote a piece for the Times magazine, about my autism diagnosis. And then when it came out, I decided to share that on social media. So yeah, I kind of didn't expect anything, to be honest. I just mostly expected people to be like, oh, right, okay, cool, shut up. And actually it's been incredible. Like, I've been welcomed to a number of different communities with open arms. I've had people contacting me, from parents to children to autistic adults, or people think that they might need a diagnosis. It's been incredible. So yeah, I just thought I'd put it out there, and it'd be like 3 likes, goodbye.
Yeah, you spill your guts out online, and and you hope for like someone to read it, but you don't expect that many people to see it and go, wow, like.
Yeah, it's a big shock. You hope someone will read it, that it's not just your parents, but it's always a big shock. I even after years and years of being an author, I still get shocked when anyone reads anything I say. All right.
Well, that's it, because obviously you're a multi-million selling author. So how do you find people when people share your or like the normal stuff, like your day-to-day sort of life stuff? Is that kind of, does that scare you a little bit, or do you find that just as well as when you sell books?
It's disorientating, because I'm a writer by trade, but also by nature, and so most of my time I spend on my own, kind of in an imaginary world. So I don't really see myself as a person that's that interesting, to be honest. I think that my offering to the world is my books. So it's always a bit of a shock when people are like, now tell us about you, and I'm like, what? Why? Why? What's the point? So I guess, obviously with me, it's been an interesting way round, because obviously I was writing my books about Harriet Manners in Geek Girl for nearly a decade, and without realising that either she was autistic or I was autistic. So it was weird to come at it from that direction. So rather than being diagnosed and writing about autism, I was writing about autism before being diagnosed. So yeah, I guess the reality is that my books are about were about me being vulnerable, about my school experiences, about what it was like being a teenager, and so it makes sense that people want to know more on like a personal basis in real life as well as in fiction.
Because I asked that question really because somebody posted online saying I was a public figure, but I don't see myself as that, and I found it quite daunting, the fact that like I'm just someone that raises awareness for dyspraxia. I don't really see myself as a celebrity or minor figure or public figure or whatever, but it's quite daunting to think people now can sort of put your name out in the stratosphere, because it's just it's like a chef. They choose to cook, but they're behind in the kitchen. They don't really want their face out on billboards. Does it make sense?
Yeah. It's a really weird, the irony that you're kind of becoming, maybe something that you're doing as a professional, or something you're doing as like something that you're passionate about is sort of maybe something that's quite, I don't know, private in the case of writing, and then they're like, and now you've got to go and talk to everyone about it. And you're going to be recognized, and it's surreal. Like, even though I've been doing it for years, like I never completely get my head around it. Like, if I meet someone and they're really nervous, or in the past I've had people cry when they meet me, and I'm like, I also feel like crying. Like, I'm like, honestly, I'm just completely as overwhelmed and as nervous as everybody else I'm talking to. So it's a strange situation, and not one that we all necessarily chase, I guess.
Yeah, I get that. So can I really start by sort of asking about I ask every guest this, about your childhood and upbringing, just so that people can get a sort of a picture in their head of sort of how everyone is brought up and how it impacts them into adulthood, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So I am from a little suburban sort of London satellite called Welwyn Garden City. That's where I'm from. So it's not a big place. It's not particularly exciting. Sorry to everyone else in Welwyn Garden, but I think we'd all agree that there are better and more exciting places. And I'm from a small house, one sister. No pets, mum and dad, and I went to a normal comp school. I was always I I would say, a different child. I know I was often described as special, which I think is sometimes what people want to say in effort to not use other words, essentially. And I was, I was undiagnosed autistic. I'm also dyspraxic. So yeah, I was a loner. I liked my own company and still do. I was hyperlexic, so very, very good with words. I could write poetry at 4 years old, but had a very spiky skill set, so pretty bad at a lot of other things. Found communication really difficult, found environments really overwhelming, constantly climbed in cupboards and under tables, struggled with any kind of physical activity, so was constantly, and still am, falling over, struggling to pick up pens, all that kind of thing. And I was just seen as a bit of an oddball, essentially, which was fine when I was younger, and then got pretty nasty later at secondary school when the bullying started. So yeah, I was, I think it was just, because it was the 80s, there wasn't really much awareness at all about any of those things. So I was just put down as being clever, clumsy, and bookish, essentially, and got missed, essentially.
So you mentioned dyspraxia. When did you get diagnosed with dyspraxia? Sorry.
So I've never actually been diagnosed with dyspraxia. I
Right,
am diagnosed with autistic. The psychologist said it does also sound like you are dyspraxic, but that's not her. That wasn't the area we were focusing on. But
Sure.
I've always known that I struggle with fine motor coordination. So I struggle with, pretty much everything. I can't get coffee on a spoon into a mug.
Yeah.
I can't walk into I will try and walk through a doorway and I will walk into the door. I'm constantly, falling over just because I can't, I have to focus when I move my feet and my legs. So it might be that maybe I'm not. Maybe I shouldn't actually say that I am dyspraxic. But from what I've read and from what the psychologist sounds like, it does sound like I'm definitely, possibly. I don't know.
What I would like to say is I will never discount the fact that you're dyspraxic, regardless if you're formally diagnosed or self-diagnosed, because our community believes in self-diagnosis just as much as formal diagnosis, purely for the fact that it's so expensive in this country to get a dyspraxia diagnosis, because it's so, it's the acknowledgement in this country of it, in this country is so little, and people have no choice but to sometimes self-diagnose themselves. And
same with autism, yeah.
I mean, I'm actually in the about to get diagnosed with autism myself. I'm in the process. Okay. So that's been a long struggle. So for me, it's the other way around. I found it easy to get a dyspraxia diagnosis as a child, but not an autism one. So it swings and roundabouts, I think. Yeah,
and it's it's because I have a clinical diagnosis of autism. I feel perhaps less. I think I feel more nervous saying I'm dyspraxic when I don't have that formal diagnosis. But you're right; it shouldn't be. There are so many barriers to diagnosis for both of those things that I think it's important that both are valid. My mum is, I believe, diagnosed dyspraxic, and she also has ataxia. So it's something that I've always been kind of aware of, and the whole "you're just clumsy" thing doesn't quite cover it, which is, I'm sure you know that, it's not quite the same thing. I have to literally use a part of my brain just to walk and get off a chair. I can't do it just naturally without thinking about it, So that was always my, and it is part of my childhood experience, I guess, and the fact that I couldn't do sports and I couldn't throw balls or anything like that didn't really help with my inability to make friends or socialize or anything like that.
I understand.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You mentioned your mum is diagnosed dyspraxic. What would you say your childbirth was like from her recollection? Was it quite stressful or easygoing?
I'm not completely sure. So she is also autistic. Though again, I've been diagnosed since diagnosis. Not well, no, it's self-diagnosed because she's in her 70s now, so she doesn't feel the need to chase her diagnosis.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, I think it was. I had a good childhood when I was younger. My family are close. My mum's an incredible person. So yeah, I think a lot of things got missed because, obviously with autism, the obvious, the literal is the way our brains tend to work, and the hints and the suggestions perhaps slightly go over our heads, to say the least. So I think that any indications previously that perhaps people tried to explain to either me or my parents got missed. So for instance, I was described as a special child with their own path when I was 3 by my nursery teacher. I was then made cupboard monitor at the age of 8 by my secondary school teacher, who told my mum that I should be put in a very small girls' school with children like me. And my doctor at 17 told me that I was wired differently to other people. But all of those things went over both our heads. So essentially, I think I spent a lot of my childhood with people going, and me and my mum going, what? You haven't used the word, so we don't get it. Sorry, no. You can hint as much as you like, it's not going to
work. yeah. So did it become sort of prominent to the people around you that you had sort of differences in the way that you was growing up, as in from other people then?
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, always. I think it was pretty much commented on constantly by everyone around me, adults and children, essentially, which is difficult, especially when you're not diagnosed and don't really understand why everyone else is constantly pointing out that you're not the same. They're whether it's in a nice way or in a nasty way, even if it's like, why do you speak weird, or like, why are you sitting like that, or why do you, it just this constant barrage of questions about why you're not the same can really damage you in the long term, because you just you're at that formative stage in your life and where you're working out who you are and your place in the world, and you're like hot wax and you're being molded at that point. And if the way that you're being molded is you're wrong, everything you do, everything you say, every way you move is wrong, that's what you tend to absorb. And that's how I absorbed it, which is why by the age of 39 I genuinely thought I was just broken, that I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, it's a shame we get to that place where we feel like that, and it's the way that people make us sometimes think like that, and it can become an uphill battle to change that mindset for ourselves, because nobody else can really change that. It's down to us, I think, to sort of believe in ourselves.
Yeah, and you're having to, especially when you're diagnosed as an adult, you're essentially having to undo decades of programming, essentially. And I after my clinical diagnosis, the psychologist, who was really lovely, went through the whole, yes, definitely autistic, couldn't be more sure. And then she was like, but on a personal note, I'm deeply concerned about your self-esteem levels, and I think that you need to be working on that consciously now, because so it's no fault of your own, but you've spent a life being told that there's something wrong with you, and you have believed it, essentially. So it's a really long process trying to undo all that trauma, essentially.
Yeah, and even that's after you've sort of done really well in your career, and you've won awards, you've sold a load of books, you still feel like that, and it goes to show that it's not materialistic things, that make you happy. It's more your self-esteem and how you believe in yourself that can kind of lift you up.
Yeah, and those external things, success and awards and all that kind of thing, they don't really have an impact on your self-esteem. And I know that sounds crazy, but they don't really. If you go home and the voice in your head is saying, why would you behave like that? Why would you do that? Why would you say that? Why, there's something wrong with you? Or if in your personal relationships, for instance, I have a tendency to have very unhelpful relationships, where, you know, they're constantly saying, it's weird that you say this, it's weird that you do this, it's weird. And it doesn't matter how many awards you win, when you've got that voice, either internal or external, coming in constantly telling you that you've screwed up, or that you're an awful person, or you can't manage anything, it makes no difference how successful you are, essentially.
Yeah. And do you think of yourself as an outsider, even though you've won those accolades and earned that success, both in your personal and career circles?
Yeah, I'm always going to be an outsider. Part of the good thing about my diagnosis is the realization that that's how I'm built. That is my wiring. I mean, I will not speak for everybody else, but for me, my wiring is that I am on the outside looking in of everything. There's a gap between me and the rest of the world. And it's not just caused by trauma from when I was a child and growing up. You know, that is how I see the world. And there's always a gap between me and them. And so I'm never really part of anything. And I think part of the diagnosis is kind of learning to be okay with that. And actually, I don't need to be on the inside ever. I can be on the outside and be happy and content with that. So again, it's just learning to understand yourself and your own particular needs better, maybe.
Yeah, and I definitely feel, having spoken to you today so far, that my podcast, sort of the idea of doing it was to meet people like yourself, sort of notable people in the community that have the same differences as myself and as my peers, but who even after having success still feel like they're an outsider, and you know, it hasn't changed much in the way of our ability to sort of be happy and feel like we're part of the world like everybody else is. So I feel like, you know, I'm feeling like on a mutual respect there, where I feel like I'm still on the outside looking in, and it's very difficult. But no, it's good to know there's others out there like ourselves.
Yeah, and actually I was looking into it, and you know, although it's a complex background and something I'm still learning about, I think that's important to say. Like, you know, when you're a person of interest, that sounds like I'm in a FBI police lineup, but like when you are a person with some kind of social media standing or whatever it is, there is the kind of tendency to believe that everything you say is like gospel, like you're right about everything, or you're like, I'm still learning. I'm still very much active in the kind of researching and learning process of what it is, what is autism, where did it come, when did they start learning about it, and all that kind of thing. One of the things that I've learned recently actually is the word autistic, etymologically, aut is self, you know, same as like automobile, and ism is usually like sort of state of being. So it's like self state of being. And, you know, it is because we were observed originally as being standoff away outsiders from society, that we didn't want to integrate, that we didn't want to be part of the masses. That was how it was, you know, that was one of the original kind of definitions, if you like, of autism. So, and I definitely in myself feel that. I definitely have always felt like an outsider, like an alien, or like someone that there's just a connection that I don't quite have with the rest of mankind. And I think that part of breaking down the stigma is actually, instead of going, hey, we can fit in, we can be like you, which most of us spend our lives trying to do and failing and masking, and, you know, it's distressing and exhausting. But actually going, hey, I'm all right. I'm all right on my own. I'm all right with the interaction that I choose, or the intimacies that I choose. I don't have to be what society is telling me is normal. So yeah, even the word autism in itself means sort of being of the self, essentially.
Definitely. And, talking of labels, what would you say, and people trying to label you throughout your life with being this and that, and using it, certain words to avoid saying the actual word. And what was your experience like at school in terms of teachers and people trying to sort of help you in regards to your education, but whilst sort of were they on board with sort of, could they tell you the hidden difference, or were they just trying to use a different track and avoid that subject, just pursue your education the same as everybody else?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I'm in the last few weeks, especially, I've been speaking to people, you know, kind of who have different needs at school, you know, whether it's because they have a learning disability or whether it's because they're autistic or whether it is, you know, both or whatever it is, they have different needs at school. And I think especially if you are in your education system and you fall on one end of your kind of needs and it's not in the masses of what most people need, you're going to get missed out. And you know, for me, I don't have a learning disability. I'm hyperlexic. I was particularly good academically, but I was a bit too good academically in that the teachers were like, I don't know what to do with her. So I just used to get sat in the corner on my own and just handed a book and told to get on with it. Like, you know, I was so many years ahead of where I was supposed to be that they just sort of went, well, you're just going to have to wait for everyone else to catch up. So school was very, very, like, obviously socially and on a social level, it was disorientating and frightening, especially from a sensory level. It was horrible. From a physical level, it was painful and confusing. But on an academic level, on a learning level, it was also just frustrating because I'd be like, I can do that already. Like, what? I'm not learning anything, and I love to learn. So I just used to get frustrated, and I'd come home and I'd say to my mum, I don't want to go to school anymore because, you know, the other kids are learning to read and I'm, you know, working with Pride and Prejudice right now. So, you know, it's, so I think that, you know, often with school and education, you do get missed out if you're on kind of, if your needs aren't the kind of majority needs, whichever end you're on, that. So, yeah, it was frustrating. I used to fall asleep in class quite a lot.
It sounds like me. I love to go to sleep at school. So, talking about being academic, you went on to study at the University of Bristol, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and a Master of Arts in Shakespeare Studies. Was there ever any distractions that sort of held you back because of your, obviously, you know you're autistic and dyspraxia? Did anything distract you from succeeding in the way that you wanted to do other things as well?
I mean, within the education system, definitely. And it's actually strange looking back at it now because, you know, obviously I've over the years found ways of masking and hiding things, and also blaming it on other things, you know. So when I was at university, like I love academia and I really love learning, writing, especially English. But I never went to a lecture in 3 years because I couldn't handle the people. So there were too many people and it was overwhelming and I couldn't sit in an environment in a lecture hall surrounded. So I didn't go to lectures for 3 years. So I paid for a degree where essentially I wasn't getting any actual teaching that was given with the degree. I was having to basically self-teach for my entire degree because I wasn't aware that I was autistic and that I needed maybe different learning environments. Maybe I'd been able to do it now, maybe I'd be able to get it online or something, but my options were go to a lecture and be overwhelmed and confused, or don't go. So I actually didn't go for 3 years, and actually when I got my degree in the end, I went to get my graduation certificate, and apparently everybody in my year was like, who is that? We've never seen her. We didn't even know she was on our course. Because, you know, that did definitely, and I should have got a first and I didn't get a first because I was having to basically self-teach my degree. So that definitely had an impact. You know, the kind of making money, for instance. So I was a student, needed to make money. And I tried so many different jobs and I couldn't really do any of them, either because of the environmental stimulus or the physical requirements. So I tried to do cocktail waitressing, for instance, and because of my dyspraxia, I found it almost impossible to get out to the tables without falling over. I dropped about 4 million cocktails. Like I was constantly just trashing things and falling down the stairs, and it was just too bright and too loud. So, you know, I tried to do so many different like kind of ways of earning money throughout my degree that I couldn't stick at for longer than 2 weeks because of many different inabilities to do stuff. So yeah, looking back, it had a massive impact, and I think it still does. You know, there's a reason why I chose a career that well, not chose, ended up in a career which is essentially sitting down at a desk on my own all day.
Yeah, I like that idea. That sounds like the best idea, isn't it? Away from people, just no alcohol, no walking around people in busy restaurants, busy bars. Just do your own thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm very lucky actually, and that's something that I've been thinking more and more about. I was unable to hold down a job in my 20s because of the reasons I mentioned, but also just because, offices, for example, are really overwhelming. And I would have frequent meltdowns. I'd be off work. I couldn't really hold down a job. So I'm incredibly, and I know that the percentage of people, who potentially are autistic and can't find employment or keep employment is a massive issue. And I have no doubt whatsoever that had I not been lucky enough to become an author, I would be on that list of people, because I am not really built for a work environment. So I feel very lucky that I managed to find the one thing I could do, sustainably, essentially.
Yeah, I think I feel like that. Some people are capable of holding down a job. It's more about sort of the infrastructure and the people that are actually there around you. Because if they are able to understand and help you, you've got a better chance of succeeding. Whereas, the fact that you work by yourself, you've got no one sort of, micromanaging you, watching what you're doing, watching you, waiting for you to fail so that they can mock you for it, rather than jump in and say, no, this is how you do it. Come along and I'll go through it with you. That doesn't seem to happen most days.
Support, it's about support, and that's what I mean. Like, absolutely, there's nothing stopping us from being amazing at jobs. It's the support levels that we maybe aren't getting. So I see a therapist every week, and yesterday I was very overwhelmed because I've been doing a lot of work and online and stuff like that. So when my overwhelm levels get too high, I struggle with meltdowns. So one of the things I do is now that I'm aware, I try and limit the stimulus so that it kind of keeps that down lower. And one of the things my therapist did yesterday was I said, I'm feeling quite overwhelmed, and she got up and she turned all the lights off in the therapy room, which immediately had an impact. Like my stress levels went down a little bit. Then she shut the curtains and it went down a little bit more. And just that kind of support, that kind of physical support, and that we're giving you what you need in order to be your best self, essentially. It can be so simple, but that in a work environment would mean enormous things for people that are potentially struggling with, whether it's putting them in a slightly darker corner or in a slightly quieter area, or giving them headphones that they can put on so that or facing them away from, there are things that people and workplaces can do that support and nurture those of us who aren't necessarily the same as other people. So I think that's what's really important. It's definitely not that we can't do the jobs, it's just that we sometimes struggle with the infrastructure that's been put in place by a society that is not built for us, essentially.
Yeah, that's sort of how it goes, I think, and it's good that you touch on the light thing, because my background is retail management, and I used to work in big superstores and small stores, and it was always a blessing when the lights went off, because I felt like I could just, there's less sensory issues going on then. But there's always a contrasting thing. If the lights were on, I'd struggle, but if the lights were off, I'd have a nice day.
Yeah. And just noise as well. So I kind of, in my mind, I see it as like a bit of a kind of sensory pot. So, and that can be internal or external stimulus. And, once I'm full, so say like the lights are too bright, that'll go into the pot. And then, say there's too much noise coming in, that'll go in. And maybe there's a baby crying and that'll go in. And maybe I'm stressed about something at work and that'll go in. And it basically builds and builds and builds. And if it gets too high, I will have full bodily meltdown and I won't be able to function for between a day and a week. That will be it. I won't be able to. When that happens, I can't really walk. There's a real, I'd like to do more studies and find out more, but there's a real crossover, obviously, between various sort of disabilities that are often comorbid, for instance. So, the impact of being both autistic and dyspraxic at the same time, because I know that when I'm overwhelmed because, of my autistic kind of qualities and the things that my brain struggles with, it directly affects my dyspraxia. So I go from being like to being like, I can't really walk, at all. I can't really move. or it has a direct knock-on effect. So it would be interesting to find out more about that. But yeah, retail is an absolute nightmare. Like I've got these like earplugs that I wear so that my pot isn't filling up too quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which can be helpful to stop overwhelm.
Certainly. And you touched on your bartending job in the past, and then I read online that you was approached at the age of 15 to become a fashion model. Did you enjoy that, and was it fun?
No, it was very overwhelming. I look back on it and I'm glad I did it, because I think adventures are always good, and I have a big tendency to say yes to stuff rather than no, sometimes to my detriment. But I didn't enjoy it at the time. No, I was not built for it. Like, I am dyspraxic, so walking down a catwalk is very, very hard. I mean, at one point I fell down the stairs of a catwalk. I fell off the end of one, I think, at one point during rehearsal. I got caught up in a dress I was putting on in a changing room, and I managed to bring the entire changing room crashing down in the middle of a photo shoot. It's not easy being a dyspraxic model, and I'm sure that there are many out there, but it is not easy, especially with being given like heels and tight clothing that you can't really move in. So that, combined with the fact that, I'm autistic, and so I found it all very disorientating and, impossible, essentially. So now I spent 2 years basically being an incredibly distressed, confused, disorientated teenager. But, it was an adventure. So,
yeah, I guess when, like you said, you touched on it about, having to use your brain to get off a chair and stuff like that. When you're a catwalk model, you're having to tell your body what to do. I guess that's very fatiguing. I guess that was very tiring and demanding on you at the time, was it?
Yeah, although I'm looking back and I am I think because I'm very conscious about how I move my body, because I have to be, because, from both an autistic perspective and a dyspraxic perspective, I kind of am conscious of every single cell in my body at all points. Like, I actually had quite a good model walk, because, I was very, very, when I focused, which I had to do in order to do it, but when I focused, I was all right. I could, get everything there in short amounts of time. But yeah, it was absolutely exhausting. And I couldn't do two things at once. So there was no way that I was going to be smiling at the same time, for instance. It wasn't going to happen. I'm guessing that there are more models than we think that are dyspraxic. But it can be tricky at times.
I know that Cara Delevingne, the actress and model, she obviously is a really high profile model, and people online remark that they're sort of flabbergasted how she manages to walk in such high heels when she's dyspraxic, and she might not be able to, but it's sometimes you coerce your brain into doing what you need to do because it's your job, I guess. It's sort of it's like most dyspraxics can't write like without your hand hurting, like I can't. So I guess if you're a writer, you sort of have to push through the barriers and do it, because that's what your bread and butter is.
Well, you find other ways as well. So I can't hold a pen really either. So I struggle to hold a pen. My handwriting is illegible. And within about a minute of writing, I will be like, and now I'm too tired to do anything else. I can't. So I realized pretty quickly that I was never going to be a writer with a pen ever. So I trained myself to touch type, and it turns out that is good for me. That I can do that. It's not touch typing is something that I can do without discomfort, essentially. So yeah, I'm never going to be a writer with a pen, and should I get stuck on a desert island, I will probably never write another book. But yeah, you're right, it's I could wear heels for a very short amount of time if I was completely 100% focused on walking, and that's it. I would never wear heels on a day-to-day basis, because if I need to do other things like talk or look around me or smile or do anything else other than walk, then that's it. I will I will be face planting within minutes. I actually fell over. I went to the HarperCollins summer party a couple of years ago, and I fell over publicly 4 times. 4 times in front of like the publishing industry's, you know, shiniest and brightest, once into a road in front of a bus. And I just kind of pretended that it was because I had too much champagne, because it was easier for me to say I've had too much champagne than I can't stay upright if I'm focusing on socializing as well.
We've all been there. You have to sort of mask sort of your clumsiness and by pretending you're either joking around or, you know, like you said, you've had too much to drink, which in like most other people would think you wouldn't want to say that because that's quite embarrassing in itself to have too much to drink. So it's the way we have to sort of mask the way we are by doing those things.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's crazy, isn't it? Like I would literally, I mean, I'm so used to falling over in a very dramatic way, because I don't do a little trip. I like, you know, I'll knock into a waiter who's carrying a tray of champagne, and that'll be it. And everyone around me goes, oh, like that. And I've gotten used to being like, I'm fine, don't worry everyone, I'm fine, it's good. Even though I'm in pain, like even though it's an enormous amount of pain and all I want to do is cry like a little kid, I have to go, it's fine, because I don't want to embarrass everyone around me. And I'm okay with them just assuming I'm hammered, as opposed to I literally didn't see the door, the you know, in the doorway where there's a little tiny thing that sticks up. Like, just, yeah, that's gone. So yeah, it's crazy how we have to mask even that, even physically we have to mask. You know, we should be more able to say, I'm dyspraxic, stop like staring at me.
Yeah. That's the shame of it being a hidden disability, in that, you know, unless you've got a tattoo on your forehead saying dyspraxic, you literally cannot get it across to people why you're doing the things you're doing, because it's the way we are. It's the way our minds work. So
yeah. And when you combine that with autism, I was thinking about it last night, and I was thinking, you know, for instance, going on a first date, like, combine dyspraxia and autism, like, you know, there is so much going on in my body and my mind at that moment, you know, right down to like, I have to focus if I'm going to pick up a glass. Like, I have to use my brain to focus to know where my hand's going. Frequently I miss it, so frequently I will knock the glass over, or I will knock the water jug over or something, and they'll be like, but you know, so I have to really focus to pick up that glass, and I have to focus to get that glass to my lips, so that it actually goes to my lips and not like into my cheek or the liquid up my nose or whatever, you know. Then I have to drink it, and I have to focus on that, and then I have to focus on putting it back down again carefully. And you know, that's just one motion on a date, combined with all the other stuff, sensory and social and communicative and like that. But just that one motion is already taking up like 25% of my brain. And you're like, and you wonder why I think dating is stressful. Like, you know, people don't see the effort that has to go into looking like you're just having a drink, you know.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah. I know. And so moving forward a little bit, when you started to write your manuscripts, and before going on to become a multi-million award-winning best-selling author, what and who made you fall in love with writing?
You know what, it's kind of, for me it's a little bit magical, because like, yeah, I genuinely feel like I was born with it. My mum is an retired English teacher, and she used to read me, because she's autistic, she just has passions, and she has no real like awareness of appropriateness, essentially. So, you know, at the age of 1 or 2, she was reading me Shakespeare and Byron and Shelley and Tennyson, and I was just obsessed straight away, like 2 years old, asking for Longfellow before I went to bed, because there was something magical about the stories and the way that the words sounded, and the whole thing about it just felt magical. So I don't remember a time ever that I wasn't obsessed with stories and words. And, you know, I was reading at 2, I was writing poetry at 4. So for me, words were integral to who I was. And I knew I was going to be an author at 4 years old. Like, there's the moment that I asked my mum, like, what is this book? How did it get here? And my mum explained, like, you know, who Enid Blyton was and how she'd written books and all that kind of stuff. I knew that's what I wanted to spend my life doing. So for me, it's, again, I'm lucky that I've managed to do that, but there was never a moment where I wasn't going to be a writer, which feels like something kind of magical, like it came from outside of me somehow.
Oh, nice. So that your book, Geek Girl, was #1 best-selling young adult fiction title in the UK back in 2013. The humorous story follows the life of Harriet Manners, a nerdy 15-year-old girl who tries out modelling to reinvent herself. Was that therapeutic or a nerve-wracking experience writing a semi-autobiographical novel? A book, rather.
Yeah, it was both. It was incredibly therapeutic, because the reason I wanted to write Geek Girl essentially was that I had never read anyone. When I started in 2009, I had never read a book that had a character in it that felt like me. I was like, where are all the girls that, fall over all the time? I mean, in fairness, there are quite a lot of books about that, but it never felt to go further than just falling over. Like, it was always like, that seemed to be it in terms of clumsiness. And where are the girls that are socially like inept and easily overwhelmed, and, that see the world in a very list-based, fact-based kind of context. So I wrote it because I hadn't seen anyone like me in a book. And I honestly didn't think anything was going to happen, but it was incredibly cathartic writing it. I remember crying quite a lot and feeling like this is the first time I've been honest about this, essentially. But that vulnerability is scary, because even when I was writing the book, I was like, no one's going to read this. My granddad's going to read this if I'm lucky. Probably never going to get a book deal. And then it, gets published and people read it, and you think, oh, I really have laid myself bare here. Like, I've really been vulnerable on a very scary level. But then people connect with it, and you meet people who are like you, or that it touches, or that it makes feel more confident. And that's life-changing. So yeah, it's cathartic, but it's terrifying, and it's rewarding in equal measure, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And would you say the character is dyspraxic, or have you just wrote the book as a dyspraxic?
Yeah, well, when I wrote Harriet, I didn't call her anything because I didn't know anything about myself. So, I didn't know she was autistic. She is 100% autistic.
Yeah.
Also dyspraxic, for the reason that I am also dyspraxic, and that she's based on me as a child. So it wasn't intentional, which is, someone asked me the other day, how can you be sure if it wasn't intentional? And I'm like, I mean, just because you're not diagnosed doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that no one's put a label on it yet. So yeah, absolutely. There are whole scenes in Geek Girl throughout the series where, she's trashing things and dropping things and basically, if I can break something and it's within a 10-mile radius, I will do it. But yeah, so it's, I think it's good to have characters, like us out there, representing in fiction.
I'm really pleased that it's out there doing what you said, and when more people go on to read the book in the series of the books, they'll associate themselves with the character and give them confidence. The fact that it's not different, it is normal, and there's other people out there just like them. So
yeah, it's actually a double whammy, because obviously since coming sport, as they call it, people have been kind of contacting me and saying, I'm autistic, or my kid is autistic, and they really identified with the books, and they really felt like passionate and happy to see someone like us or like them in the books. But the reality is that if you sell 3.5 million books, not everybody who reads that book is autistic or dyspraxic, like statistically unlikely. So, the reality is, what I think is brilliant is that even if you're reading those books and you're neither of those things, you can still identify and love and relate to someone, which just makes, is society, I think, more aware that we are complex, fascinating humans that can't just be kind of put a label on and just parked off and sent off into the sunset on a raft boat. Like, we are lovable, amazing, fascinating people, and we deserve to have stories, and we deserve to have our stories read, regardless of whether it's by people like us or not.
Yeah, I agree. And with your diagnosis of autism coming towards as you approach 40, was there any resentment towards others for you slipping the net for those 4 decades? Did you ever feel sort of? vengeful about it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a naturally very vengeful person. I'm relatively positive as a personality, but I'm not gonna. I wouldn't lie and say that there were no moments of anger and disappointment and sadness, because, you know, essentially I got missed and I got let down by the education system. I got let down by medical professionals. I got let down in a little way by my own parents, who have had to, you know, who've apologised since and gone, we had no idea, and, you know, we're so sorry. Although, you know, in the 80s, it wasn't a topic that people were really talking about. So, you know, but I did get let down and I got missed by the people that were supposed to be there to look after and support me, which resulted in huge amounts of trauma. You know, I mean, I used to spend my time at secondary school every lunchtime underneath a pile of coats on the floor of the changing room, because I was so distressed and so overwhelmed by the people, the environment, the bullying, the sound, the noise, all of it, that I would have meltdowns and have to just go underneath a pile of coats. And, you know, I look back at my 11-year-old self with just a breaking heart, because I'm like, I shouldn't have had to do that. Like, some adult should have stepped in and helped me, but they didn't. And so, yeah, there is an element of anger and disappointment, but, you know, I can't change the past. So all I can do is speak about it, and hopefully in speaking about it, help other people like me not get missed, and thus turn it into a positive, I guess.
Yeah, women in general seem to go amiss when it comes to their learning disability or differences, when it comes to getting the recognition for it. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I mean, it's particularly with autism. It was always like back in the day. It's got a very complex and quite disturbing history. But back in the day, you know, scientists didn't even believe that girls and women could be autistic. They didn't believe that we had brains that were complex enough. So, you know, the studies that were done were studies on boys. So they looked at, you know, how it represented in boys, and what boys were particularly interested in doing, and how boys behaved if they, for instance, were autistic. And it's only really, really recently that people are starting to go, because I mean, at one point in the 90s, there were 16 times more boys diagnosed as autistic than girls. And I don't believe that, given it's a neurodivergence, I don't believe it's a male neurodivergence. How can that possibly be the case? So in that case, 15 of those 16 girls were being missed. And I think it's because society and medical professionals were still kind of working out what it was. You know, autism wasn't even named until the early 1900s. And it didn't go into the DSM as, you know, kind of being, early 1900s. I'm thinking about the right decade, right century. But either way, it was male based, and so not only were the medical professionals and, you know, the educational system looking at boy autism essentially, and how that came across, but that was then being relayed into the media and fiction. So, you know, essentially, if you weren't Rain Man, and you didn't have really great card reading abilities, or you weren't part of the Big Bang Theory, for instance, like you were not seen as possibly being autistic. So, and what's fascinating especially is, so for instance, with boys, you know, say they, for instance, and this is a stereotype again, and I'm not saying that this is what happens with autistic boys, but there's this media stereotype that, for instance, an autistic little boy will really like, I don't know, collecting trains or Lego, right? And that is, I think if a little boy suddenly starts collecting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, people will sort of maybe perk their ears up and go, okay, maybe we should be looking at, you know, if there's anything else. Whereas with girls, you know, a girl can have 75 Barbies and they won't go, oh, hang on, let's have a look at this. You know, a girl can have, you know, 150 cuddly toys, but they won't go, this could be something, because it's seen as just being girly, you know. They're like, it's all the words that are, you know, with boys would set up more support and more interest in, you know, finding a diagnosis. With girls, they're just, you know, put aside. So my fussy eating or my eating restrictions were just seen as fussy. You know, my easy overwhelm kind of was described as sensitive. You know, all of the things that if I had been a boy would have been picked up. As a girl, they were just like, oh, she's just really bookish. You know, and it's a gender thing. And I think that's why now more and more women are coming out and going, hang on a second, we've been measuring this by like love of trains. maybe it's not a love of trains. Maybe that's not quite how autism works. So yeah, I think things are changing, and it will mean that less girls and women slip the net, but it didn't catch me in time, that's for sure.
That is sad, but I'm hoping the future is going to be different for the next generation. That, you know, we can sort of reverse the way that people are assessed, and, you know, it's not down to gender, it's just down to if you've got the disability or not. You know, because you know, if you're, regardless if you're a woman or male, you should be able to get a diagnosis. It's just, that's the way I feel it should be. And
it shouldn't stop you from that. And also, you know, important to point out that boys can be, and men can be, missed on the autistic spectrum as well, just because they don't also behave like little boys on the spectrum. So, you know, it's not just girls and women that get missed, it's also boys that aren't behaving like they expect the boys to behave. So, you know, it doesn't do anyone good, essentially.
I can vouch for that, because as I said earlier, I'm 30 now, or 31 now, and I'm about to get diagnosed with autism. So I've been I missed that net ages ago, and also it transpired that I'm also dyslexic and I've got ADHD, and that wasn't picked up at school or in teenage years. So yeah, you know, boys, there are boys out there that do miss the net, but predominantly it's more women and girls that miss it as well. So it's quite a hard way to live, but eventually you hope that you get the help you need.
Yeah, so a few people have said since diagnosis, why do we need to label everything? And it's the most stupid comment. Just the most stupid. So first of all, if you have a broken leg, you go to the doctor and they tell you you've got a broken leg, and they give you a cast, and they, you know, you need to know what it is so you can actually work around it, first of all, and get the support and the help you need for it. But, you know, also a label can mean that you understand yourself better. You know, I know I used this analogy the other day, but, you know, it's basically like living your entire life believing you're a duck, and then being told at the age of 39 that you're actually a frog. And suddenly you realize you're not a broken duck, you're actually a really kick-ass frog, but no one told you, and you spent 4 decades thinking that you were just really rubbish. So I think labels can be the difference between feeling like, you know, there's something wrong with you, and understanding that there's nothing wrong with you and that you're just different. So for me, they're really helpful. And also in finding community, you know, as you do with these podcasts. And
thank you.
Yeah, finding community and passing that narrative on and making sure that we're talking about it, that's so important.
Definitely. And having had those labels now, being self-employed, I presume, do you get any sort of reasonable adjustments by your agent or your publisher? Do they give you more time, or do they allow for things to go wrong occasionally? If there's a printing error or delay, like a timing error, or, you know, load of spelling mistakes by accident, or do they allow for that? Or
I think what's really interesting is that I've been very lucky with my publisher, because I've been working with them a decade now. And they have always made those allowances for me. They've always supported me in that way. So they knew very early on, for instance, that I was never going to meet a deadline. It was never going to happen. I once missed a deadline so badly that I was still writing the last page of a book while the printing press was paused because I hadn't finished the book yet. I mean, that's how bad I am at meeting deadlines. And, you know, they knew, for instance, that with public events, school tours, festivals, anything where I had to speak to a lot of people, that I needed a lot of time before and after to recover, to adjust, that I needed to have an area of privacy and quiet that I could go to. You know, they have always made adjustments and supported me even before the diagnosis. And I think that that's really important as well. You know, it's great to have a label and it's great to be able to explain. And now obviously I can say, by the way, all those things because I'm autistic and I didn't realize. But even without a label, they were compassionate enough to listen to me and for me to say, look, I can't do a YouTube channel because it's too much and it's too overwhelming and it takes me 3 days to do 3-minute video. It's not a good use of my time.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, you know, and instead of going, we need you to do one, they were like, understood, thank you. That's and I think that there's a lot to be said for employers and that kind of thing, kind of making adjustments like that, even if you don't have an official diagnosis or a label, because it's just being compassionate and decent, But yeah, I do feel it easier now to ask for things.
I really feel blessed to hear that, because I've had bad experiences myself of employers not being sort of forthcoming and helpful. So that's really good to hear, and I'm sure people will be pleased about that. Do you have any sort of coping strategies day to day for your autism and dyspraxia?
I'm still working on them, to be honest, but they've been a lifelong kind of, even before diagnosis, they were things that I was working on. So, small things can really help me. So I'm always carrying around like earplugs and that kind of thing, so that if things become overwhelming, I can just shut out at least one sensory overload. I write down everything, like literally lists of schedules for my day that include have lunch and have a shower, because I will not remember to do it, and I'll get overwhelmed, and I'll, especially if I'm hyper focused, which I often am when I'm writing, I can go 14 hours without remembering to go to the loo or eat, or drink. So making sure that I'm parenting myself in a good way. If I'm overwhelmed, I have strategies that work for me. Like I have an hour and a half bath every day, which it is partly it's obviously a luxury, but it is partly because that is how I decompress. And if things get too stressful, it physically will calm my senses down, because all I can feel is heat. So that's, I can decompress, and doing that on a daily basis means that my levels stay lower. So for me, it's just working out those kind of strategies, making sure I'm never late for anything, because first of all, my autistic part really doesn't like being late for things and gets very distressed. My dyspraxic part can't be late for things because I can't speed up. So if I have to be there faster, it's not going to happen. I can't run. I can't jog to the place. I can't, and the more stressed I get, the more likely it is that I'm going to fall over, drop things, smash things, forget things. So, it's just kind of making allowance for myself and being kinder, really, rather than just being like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Or why can't you do that? And just being like, give yourself time to get there so you don't, fall into the road halfway. I think it's just learning what your own management strategies are to make your life easier.
Definitely. And talking of time, I know I'm conscious that you've got other commitments today in terms of podcasts.
Not until later, so it's fine.
Brilliant. So I was going to ask, because we're coming up to the final few questions, but what other plans, as well as writing, do you have for the future in terms of your career?
So I think for me, it's been a kind of natural hiatus, because obviously COVID and 18 months of living alone, which, was more distressing than you might think for someone who really likes being alone. It's not something you choose to do solidly for 18 months. And that combined with the end of my last book series and my autism diagnosis, which has obviously thrown a lot of very, big emotions and just, it's been very disruptive mentally for me while I process and all that kind of thing. So it's been a really good time for me to just go, okay, take a breath. What do we want? And what do I need? So for me, I'm obviously going to carry on writing, but I'm kind of starting to, I've written a TV pilot, for instance, for a TV series. I've written some ideas for other TV shows and films. So potentially books, maybe for adults, but also just basically just having fun with writing and words is my plan going forwards. But who knows? Who knows what will happen?
I like the sound of that. It sounds like there's a lot going on in the horizon, which, it's worth looking out for. And I can't wait to see and read what comes out. But in terms of living and working alone, how would you what would you describe sort of social isolation from your point of view to other people out there in the community that have suffered a lot in the last year, especially from loneliness and, just being deprived of, interaction in general?
Yeah, it's been rough for everybody, hasn't it? The last year and a half has been.
Sure
I don't know anybody I don't know anybody, regardless of our situations, whether we're, with a family, whether we're a single mom, or whether it's alone. We've all struggled. I think what's really important to remember when you live alone is that you may well live alone and have chosen a life where, you enjoy that solitude and you enjoy working on your own. And for me, that is definitely true. I'm a lone wolf. That's how I exist. However, that doesn't mean that I want to be legally forced to be on my own for, a year and a half, because I still need that human interaction. I just need to be able to control it. I need to be able to limit it and manage it according to my energy levels. And actually, having no interaction with anybody for such a long period of time is incredibly damaging to mental health, and I really struggled with depression and anxiety and creativity over the last year and a half. So I think it's important to remember, like, if you're someone who is quite a loner by nature and you choose to live alone, doesn't mean that you're not going to find that hard to be forced into that situation for a long period of time. And we all just have to kind of be kind to ourselves and, accept that the mental health deterioration that comes with that it's not our fault, essentially. I mean, no one saw a pandemic coming. So, well, maybe some people did. Maybe some people should have done, but that's not really the point. The normal person out there wasn't prepared for it, and we're not mentally prepared for it or built for it necessarily. So, yeah, I know I struggle.
I mean, you can prepare for an asteroid, and I suppose you can deal for an asteroid coming towards Earth. But, I guess pandemics, you just never know when it's going to happen. So we was all caught short, basically, and underprepared. But
exactly, we had no deadline, like we had no end point. It wasn't even, especially someone who's autistic and really, really appreciates schedules and kind of having things in the diary that I know exactly when's going or not. Like, we didn't get one for the pandemic. It wasn't like it's going to start in March and end in October. Like it was like it's kind of going on indefinitely and we don't know, and you can't manage that. Like, you can't make plans around it, you can't mentally prepare around it. It's just seems infinite. It seems like it's going to go on forever, and that's damaging in itself. I think if we'd been given a cut-off point, we might have maybe managed it a little easier.
yeah we all sort of rely on deadlines, I suppose, but it's been tough, hasn't it, for everybody? But it's it's been sort of intriguing, how we're going to come out the other side. I should once things all get back to the roadmap. But
although interestingly, I was talking to someone yesterday actually, about the impact that this pandemic has had on autism diagnosis, for example, where, for instance, obviously children have been at home rather than at school, which has allowed, so some of them that have been struggling at school are suddenly not struggling so much at home because they're not being they're not around as many people, there's not as much external stimulus going on, so actually they have found it easier, which has made it kind of highlighted that there's an issue, that they need support at school, and also they're spending more time with their parents. So perhaps previously their parents were like, they're fine, and after a year and a half at home, their parents are like, okay, we're sort of understanding now that they might need more support. So I think that the pandemic in itself may have brought a lot to the surface for a lot of children and adults, which might be a tiny silver lining, maybe.
Definitely. I mean, there's a saying that pancakes have two sides, and to every pancake it's a different side. So when you flip things, there's going to be a different outcome, but sometimes the outcome that you weren't expecting is probably better than the one you wanted. And although people have had it hard the past year, some people have sort of found that it's enabled them to find out that they had differences because they've been taken away from what they're used to, and it's sort of highlighted certain things that were different about them that other people actually cottoned onto, and they actually took the time to go, oh, I'm spending time with you now, I know exactly what might be wrong or what you're struggling with, I know what that could be. Whereas before, going to work, going to school, going to college, whatever, you just didn't have the time to sit there and go, what could it be? Now you had no choice but to deliberate over certain things.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly why I don't think it's a coincidence that I was diagnosed during a pandemic, because the reality is that before lockdown happened, I was incredibly busy, and I was either doing school tours, I was doing festivals, I was, writing books. There was always go, and I was on a treadmill of, kind of career and relationships and dating and all that kind of thing. And then suddenly the pandemic happened, and it all went away, and I was kind of left to my own devices. And yet I was still having meltdowns. I was still struggling with the things that I had been struggling with before. And I think having that gap and that space, if you like, and that time to actually go, okay, something else is going on here. I'm not just overwhelmed by my work, for instance, allowed me to go, no, there is something deeper here. It's not just, I don't like doing school festivals. So, I think it has revealed, it's kind of, pulled back a bit of the curtain on some people, and not even just with things like autism, but like with mental health problems and various issues that perhaps have been buried before and then suddenly revealed by all this time that we had to kind of sit with ourselves.
Would you say that your creativity is mostly reliant on the outside world to inspire you? Do you feel like you're trapped being indoors by yourself in terms of your ability to think and be creative?
Yeah, so I think I was talking about this the other day. So I have a lot of creative friends, and I think that there tends to be two types of creative. There tends to be the creative that creates from a place of like sadness and distress, and then there's the creative that creates from like happiness and joy and peace. And I'm the latter. So I definitely create when I'm happy and content and inspired. And misery just wipes me out. Like, it leaves me with nothing. I have nothing to give the world at all. And so I found it hard to create anything during the pandemic at all. It took me a year and a half, 2 years nearly, to write a book that would normally take me 6 months, because I was just like empty, essentially. And I definitely take my inspiration from people around me, from people watching, from, traveling for me, from just being an observer of the world. So yeah, the pandemic was not good for creatives that use that kind of inspirational source. I'm sure there are lots of people out there who did amazing productivity, but I wasn't one of them.
For me, I think the lockdown was not a good thing, but it enabled me to sort of challenge myself better, because before I would never have done a podcast, would never have, gone out of my way to speak to people. I wouldn't have known how to do certain things with technology, and the lockdown gave me a chance to do all those things. So in a way, I guess it's been quite beneficial, as well as sort of diminishing in other respects. But I
agree. It definitely pushed us out of our comfort zone, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it's enabled me to become a bit more extrovert, and my personality is more introvert. Where would you see yourself from a personality aspect, away from disabilities? Would you see yourself as introverted or extroverted?
I'm introverted. I'm very introverted. Yeah, I'm a heavy masker, essentially. I've spent many years through necessity building a mask, and so I can do a sort of social mask of like being social butterfly and stuff, but it's a performance and it's not real, and I genuinely get overwhelmed. And I've had situations where I've been, for instance, at book launches, where one of my best friends was like, "Are you okay?" Because the mask dropped, I couldn't do it, and I just went into like complete shutdown. Had to go and have sit in the corner of a bathroom with my arms like over my head, because I couldn't mask. So yeah, for me, I'm an introvert 100%, with moments of masked extrovert. But no, the real me is a lie under a blanket with a book and a cat kind of person.
Yeah, I guess we've all been sort of, as dyspraxics, autistics, people on the spectrum, neurodivergency world, been putting on a show for years. We're probably the best actors in the world, I would imagine. Because we're so used to performing a play each day. Every day is one big act, and all this masking, it can really wear us out. And we're all deserving of a big break somewhere. But
I think if you're not neurodivergent, you don't quite understand masking, because people will say, "Are you masking now?" And you're like, I mean, it's not always that conscious. It's not like mask on, mask off. I mean, it can be mask on, mask off. So if I'm doing, for instance, a stage talk to people, It will be literally mask on, mask off. Like, I will have a persona that I put on and I go out and I do it. But on like a daily basis, you know, the mask, it fluctuates, it comes in and out, it moves here where it wants to be, like, and it's not something that you can just be like, and now I won't mask. Now I will be me versus now I will be an actor that plays me. But it's exhausting, absolutely draining. And, you know, I'd say I have a ratio of about 1 to 10 for social interaction versus alone time. Because I need like all this time to recover from being around other people.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that, you know, having to mask quite a lot, sort of, has it affected any relationships, or both in a romantic or friendship sort of way, because people don't understand if you're, you know, being yourself, or whether you're sort of putting on a front, or, you know, has it impacted you in that way?
Yeah, immensely. I mean, I've never really been in a serious relationship ever. I've dated a lot of people. I think some people misunderstood. They were like, oh, she's never, you know, been on with a guy ever. And I'm like, I have dated a lot of people, but having a long-term intimate relationship is not something that I've really experienced, because it's exhausting. And, you know, I struggle so much with, not just in my own emotions, but other people's emotions, and with kind of interpersonal relationships and masking, which is exhausting. I don't think I've ever been in a relationship where I haven't masked all the time. And, you know, the rare moments where I haven't masked or where it's dropped, they've reacted really badly. They've reacted, you know, whether or not it's kind of like, that's a weird thing to do, or that's a weird thing to say, or that's really put me off you, or, you know, those kind of comments just mean that the next time you have a relationship, you're like, must not do that, you know. So like, and it becomes exhausting. And, you know, especially when you're quite a solitary person, you kind of go, well, I mean, have I got the energy to be in a relationship that I'm going to have to mask constantly, and that they're going to want stuff from me that I can't give them, you know, that you know, they want to move faster than I'm capable of, or emotionally get really pushy, or whatever it is. So no, I've never, you know, I find romantic relationships incredibly difficult. Friendships I'm getting better at as I get older. Possibly because I'm meeting people who are okay with me not masking as much. But yeah, it's tricky. It's really, really tricky.
Yeah, it's a battlefield sometimes, but that, you know, the way that people approach you from a relationship side of things, when you put your marks down, that's down to them really to sort of, that's their problem. You know, they can't handle it. What, you know, the real you, that's their issue, not yours.
Yeah, I agree.
At least then you haven't been with them for years, and they've turned out to be masking themselves, pretending that they actually tolerated your differences. You've had a lucky escape in that respect.
Yeah, but I, you know, from the other side of it, I also do. I mean, I guess I don't know if compassion for them is the right word, but like, essentially, I have been masking when they met me, so they have a version of me in their heads that is a combination of me masking and a combination of their projections, which are normally pretty vivid. And they are alarmed by the glimpses of me not masking that they see. So, you know, it's bad. It's bad generally, I think. It's just, and it's distressing, especially if I like them genuinely, and then they see me for who I actually am, and they run. Like, that's upsetting. And it makes you not want to do it again, because you're like, I don't want to make myself vulnerable again if that's going to be the reaction. So yeah, it's tricky.
Do they, or those that have stuck around and sort of, you know, you've gone your different ways, but you still kept in touch perhaps, do they see you more as a sisterly sort of person rather than a romantic, because they have to care for you different, because you know, we are different, I suppose. So do they see you more as, oh, I've got to look after her, opposed to be with her? Does it make sense? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have friends that are exes. I know that's one of, it's an autistic quality, although it's not necessarily one that we all have. Yeah. But for me, the bridge burning, which is the, you know, the black and white thinking, like, we are dating, now we are enemies type dichotomy, is one I definitely have been guilty of in the past. So I have a lot of ex-boyfriends, and none of us are really in contact. But And many of them I've ended the relationship with because I don't feel comfortable with, how much they want from me, or what the way they're treating me, essentially. But yeah, I think I confuse my partners quite a lot, especially, if they're looking for an emotional reaction. And I've realized since my diagnosis that essentially I, in a relationship, which always feels like, for me, an alien concept. I don't really completely understand it. But in a relationship, they want emotion. They want to see that I like them, especially in the early days. And I don't show much emotion, and I don't express it on my face or with my words, really. Which means that they end up doing increasingly desperate kind of things to try and get me to show emotion, whether it's flirting with other people, or cheating on me, or whatever it is. They will do things to try and get a proof of my emotion, and I still won't give it to them. So it becomes quite unpleasant, really, because I'm still hurting. I'm just not showing it to them.
Yeah.
So no, I'd say that most of us are not still buddies anymore.
I read the other day that you don't have much empathy in general because of your autism, but that's quite contrasting, because a lot of people with autism tend to have more empathy because of it. But I find myself not having much empathy. Was that a correct thing for them to publish, or?
Oh, who wrote that? No, I don't. I don't think. I have high levels of empathy. Like, it's
okay.
Definitely. Yeah, so I think maybe someone got the wrong end of the stick. I generally have high empathy levels. Like,
Sure.
It was something that came up in my clinical diagnosis, like that I have abnormally high empathy levels, which is one of those, things that people don't believe can be true with autism. They're like, you don't show empathy. I think the difference is we don't show empathy sometimes the way that people expect empathy to be shown. We don't show it on our faces sometimes. We don't show it in our voices. We don't express it in the way that people want us to. So the difference between feeling it and other people seeing it is obviously quite a big one. I do think that in some areas I probably lack empathy. Definitely. It's something that I'm becoming aware of, that there are definitely moments where I should care and I really don't care at all. Is that what you mean for you? Like, that you're aware?
It sounds like me, actually, the way you just summed it up. But I was quite surprised. I thought it was a mistake on their part, because it didn't correspond to the conversation we've just had, and the articles I've been scouring the internet for the last couple of days, reading and doing my research. So I was thinking, that doesn't sound right. But I have empathy in some respects, but not in others. So it can be heightened in most places, but then I can be kind of like disregarding in others, and it can throw people off a lot. So
I definitely have. In fact, I would say that for me, I'm what is quite commonly, I think, in autistic circles, known as an empath, which is where you literally feel what other people are feeling. So it's down to mirror neurons in the brain, which for people like sociopaths and narcissists, they have underactivated ones. So they don't. They're the neurons that basically connect with someone else and what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and they activate in your brain to create the same feeling in you, right? They did tests with monkeys and stuff. Like, you can see it on scans, right? So with sociopaths and narcissists, they don't really light up. Sometimes they don't light up at all. So there's no empathy. There's literally nothing happening there. They can't connect with the other person. Whereas the opposite would be empaths, where their mirror neurons light up as soon as they see something happening to someone else. And so you will feel the same pain, the same distress, the same misery, whatever it is. And I definitely have that. But it's not always a good thing, because sometimes I don't want someone else's pain. I'm like, I need to work out how I feel, and I can't work out how I feel if you're busy hurting, because all I feel is your pain. That's it. Which becomes difficult in a relationship, because you can't put forward your own point. You just become taken over by them. So I'm not quite sure. There are probably moments where I lack empathy and understanding, but generally I'd say that I'm highly empathetic. So whoever wrote that, I will take them down.
I know you'll be surprised by the amount of finding podcast guests and stuff. And there's been times when someone's quoted somebody as being dyspraxic, but they're actually dyslexic. And what staggers me the most is that the talent's like agent or representative knows that the article is out there, but they don't realise that there's a mistake in the article, which means that people like me go up inquiring thinking they're dyspraxic, but they're not. So I go into, I mention it sort of in general and go, oh, did you know so-and-so's dyspraxic? And then I forgot they're actually not dyspraxic, they're dyslexic. And then, everyone goes, oh, I didn't know they're dyspraxic. And then someone else goes, oh, Billy said that so-and-so's dyspraxic, but actually they're not, they're dyslexic. And,
it gets confusing, right?
Yeah. So
when they're out there in the world, they'll write whatever they want, and sometimes it's not always what you've said or what you've tried to get across, and I think definitely empathy from an autistic perspective, because I remember saying to the psychologist when I was having my diagnosis, I was like, I definitely feel empathy, and I feel like that's something that I shouldn't be able to do. And she's like, that's not true, it's a misunderstanding, people haven't, it's completely false myth basically about autism, but we don't have it in a neurotypical way, so for me, what's interesting thinking about it is how neurotypically it's often sympathy. So it's actually not empathy, it's sympathy. It's performance of, oh no, I'm sorry, that's awful. Oh, that's really terrible. It's actually just a verbal and, facial presentation of sympathy. But the actual empathy, the actual feeling inside isn't necessarily there. Whereas I sometimes feel with autistic people, it's the other way around, and we will feel the pain and we will feel that. But the performance of sympathy isn't really there. So I'm not very good at being like, oh no, I'm really sorry for you, that sounds awful. Whereas inside I might be hurting horribly for you, but people get mixed up. I think sometimes neurotypicals mix that up.
I would definitely say about the mixing up thing, because I feel like, I definitely read it like that, and I'm sure it was written that way. But, being dyspraxic, being autistic, being dyslexic, it could be my brain telling me that's what it said.
Oh, I don't mind. They can write what they like.
I might be wrong, but that's how I read it, and that's how I've took it. But, my brain just isn't for changing. So, but no, if they've wrote it, then, it's out there. But yeah, that's the way our brains work. Sometimes I get mixed up and miswired and,
Oh no, I don't mind. I don't mind what people write, to be honest. But it's part of the journey, right? Into working out, am I empathetic? Am I sympathetic? Am I, because we are essentially only aware of our own brains and what our own brains do, and how they think. And that's why you can get to 39 years old and not realise you're autistic, because I just assumed everyone thought like me, and I'm constantly surprised by things I can do or not do that other people find difficult or easy. I'm like, what do you mean you can't remember every moment of your entire life in vivid detail, including smells? How do you not remember everything? Because I just assumed that that's what the human brain could do. So yeah, it's a period of experiment and research, I think, for me.
Definitely. And I've got one sort of last question, because it's just come into my head. You just touched on it, but would you say you have a good long-term memory? And if so, does that really help when it comes to writing, because you can sort of recall things that happened in the past that you put into your books?
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, I can't understand how I would write without it, to be honest. I mean, I have a terrible short-term memory. I mean, I have to set a timer when I put toast in the toaster, because even though it pops out, I forget that it's there and it will just go cold and I won't eat it. So, my short-term memory is abysmal, but my long-term memory is insane. And I remember things vividly that happened at 2 years old, 3 years old, and it means that when I'm writing, even if I've never experienced that exact situation, I can just literally go through my life like a film, and I can rewind it to the bit where I find an occasion where I have felt like that or been in a similar situation, or I can use those emotions and relate them back to what's happening in the book. And I can literally write those vividly as they were at the time. And it means that my database is enormous, because I have 39 years of those. So my long-term memory, which I believe is also not always an autistic thing, but is commonly associated with autism. It's a huge gift. It's awful as well, because it means that, if I go through a painful experience, I will remember that painful experience in detail for the rest of my life. There's no getting over it. But it can be a blessing and a gift as well. So yeah, my writing fully is built on my memory, for sure.
Oh, good. So, talking of memory, do you know where we can find you online and on social media for those that want to check you out and find out about your books and get reading?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Smale on Twitter and Instagram. I'm not on Facebook because, but yeah. So Smale on Instagram and Twitter. So you're welcome to come and say hello. And, I try to reply to everybody, although I think I might have to stop doing that because I'm not going to be able to write any new books. But yeah, so I'm always up for meeting new people. So yeah, come and say hello.
Oh, brilliant. We're blessed to have you in our community and hope to work for you again in the future, hopefully.
Amazing. It was lovely to meet you and I feel really honoured to be on your podcast.
It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on, and it's been really nice to meet you and get to know you better, and I hope to speak in the future.
Amazing. You too. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you, Holly. Speak soon.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Struggling with your DIY, we can do it for you. Decorating, tiling, window care, bathrooms, kitchens, en-suites too. Commercial and industrial, RFDP and does it all. Roofing, fencing, landscaping, why not give us a call? RFDPM. Covering the southeast of England. Please call 07958 249 781 for a free, no obligation quotation.
Dyspraxia Alliance is run by a group of dyspraxia advocates who are dedicated to providing support, advice, online safety, advocacy, and much more. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Come along to the spectacular Dyspraxic event everybody is talking about. Keep fit with our free, twice weekly fitness workout. Search Dyspraxic Cardio King Mike on social media for more information.
We believe every child has potential. We know everyone learns differently. We have learned that one size never fits all. Neurodivergent children and young adults should have the world at their feet. We provide the specialist equipment to help make that possible. For more information on how we can help and the equipment we can supply, please visit www.equipforlearning.org.uk.